I've been asked to say a few words about the 1920s, right through to the 1960s, a time that I began to hear about from my father when I was about 10 or 11, thinking of going off to boarding school to learn how to play rugby, and it was always about the Hospitals Cup and what went on. Morgan showed you a picture of all the hospitals. He left out one, and I've left out one, and the one I left out, if anybody can spot it, Morgan has a bottle of champagne afterwards for the person who spots it. The one that Morgan left out was, of course, the veterinary college, and more about that later, because that is a very important part of the history of the Dublin hospitals. So the Civil War, before the Civil War, the War of Independence had concluded with the declaration of a republic on, I think it was January the 21st, 1919. And immediately the new government set about enacting laws. And one of the areas that they turned their attention to was the Medical Act. And up until then, all Irish qualified doctors, of which there were very, very many, would register with the General Medical Council. Bearing in mind the number that had come from South Africa and so on, of course registration with the General Medical Council was wholly important for your future passport to medicine, be it in the colonies or wherever. But the new government decided that they would have their own medical council, and of course there was consternation. All of these overseas students coming to Dublin to study medicine now having to register with an Irish Medical Council, which would not be recognised throughout the Commonwealth or elsewhere. And only for the effort of one man, Sir Thomas Green, who lobbied on behalf of all of the students of Ireland in order to gain reciprocity between Dublin and London, so that the Irish medical degrees would be recognised across the world, the same as if they were British degrees, and would also be on the British or the General Medical Register. In fact, he even spoke about how not having medical students coming to Ireland from other countries would affect the quality of the rugby between the hospitals. And it was actually believed that the only medical school that would survive on the island of Ireland would be up in Belfast. Now, the 1920s were a time in hospitals rugby that were dominated by the Richmond Hospital, of which there were two famous players. On the left-hand side, Morgan Crowe, father of Morgan, who's here tonight, and grandfather of Stuart and Morgan. Stuart, who played in the Hospitals Cup as well. And then Paul Murray, the great Paul Murray, who was a legend at scrum half or out half, and who spent many of his working years in the Richmond Hospital, but more about him anon. But these two were to dominate rugby throughout the 1920s. They were the terrible twins. But I just want to begin very briefly with a team that didn't win the Hospitals Cup. In fact, this is the City of Dublin Hospital that competed in 1920-21. The competition was won that year by Duns, for whom Jamie Kinche did not star, which is not surprising given that he was playing at full back. But it's mentioned in the Irish Times that Duns won the competition without Kinche starring. Of course, that was a big no. The two people that I want to draw your attention to in this photograph are Jack and Dennis Kostin. Two or four brothers from Newcastle West and Limerick, who all went to Blackrock College, and between them won 6 Leinster Schools medals in Blackrock. And I think Dennis won 2 or 3. Both of them qualified from Trinity. Both were extraordinary individuals. Jack, after qualification, went to London and practiced in London until he joined the Royal Navy Volunteer Reserve, and he was posted on HMS Exeter. HMS Exeter was the first ship to engage the Graf Spee outside Uruguay and took a ferocious pounding. Multiple hits, broadside, even though the ship didn't sink. In his diary, Jack Kostin describes the carnage on board as the shells came in, and all he had was morphine. In fact, he describes the pile of bodies being like a rugby scrum on the foredeck. It was an appalling carnage. Afterwards, he settled back in London and practiced medicine for many, many years. Dennis was a winger, and Dennis was a phenomenon. He could do the 100 yards, on grass in 9.8 seconds. He equaled the world record on one occasion. He was an extraordinarily fast individual. He was on 3 cup-winning teams in Blackrock. He captained 2 of them. Within his first year at Trinity College in Dublin, he got a final Irish trial, and then he was played with the Irish team for at least 6 years afterwards. And here he is, as the famous phrase, it wasn't Jerry McLaughlin who was festooned with Saxons when he crossed for the try in Twickenham many years later. In fact, it was Dennis Kostin. He was so fast that nobody could catch him. And here he is in the victorious team, playing outside Eugene Davey, who was a great star at the time. At that time in the Dublin Hospitals, to become president of the Dublin Hospitals was almost akin to becoming president of the Royal College of Physicians or the Royal College of Surgeons. Everybody competed for this important post. On the left you see Frank Purser, who was the first neurologist in the Richmond Hospital, who was capped 3 times for Ireland, and he sort of steered the competition through some tricky era. He was succeeded then by the famous Dr. Solomons, Bethel Solomons, who himself had played 10 or 11 times for Ireland. The meetings used to take place down in the Dolphin Hotel, which still stands there. The records of the meeting were meticulously kept in fountain pen in diaries, and the diaries are all downstairs and have been safeguarded on our behalf and your behalf for posterity by Harriet Wheelock. And we were a great depth of gratitude for the work that she's done to save these diaries. And they're a fantastic record, word-for-word descriptions of events, fights, battles, and so on, and more of that anon. The Dental Hospital were now about making their mark in the competition. Now, to win the competition for the first time in 1923. And I've starred 3 players on the Dental Hospital team at the time. There was Cunningham, there was Atkins, and there was Dixon, all who played for Ireland. Atkins and Cunningham fought in the First World War, were students of the Royal College of Surgeons and had returned from the war, as did many of the students from the Dental Hospital at the time. They had fought in the First World War. They're mentioned on the Roll of Honour in the Royal College of Surgeons. Cunningham himself, after he qualified, went first of all to South Africa and then on to Rhodesia and played for Rhodesia against the All Blacks in the 1930s. They were extraordinary players. And as I say, not surprising that the Dental Hospital was so strong at that time with so many players coming back from the First World War. But the Richmond were the dominant team. And they were to win 3 in a row. Difficult at times against really fantastic Duns teams for whom Crichton and Irish International and Kinche starred. So it really was down to the combined efforts of Murray and Crowe that helped them over the line on 3 occasions. But also the efforts of a chap called Jerry O'Neill, whose nephew was in the audience, Giles O'Neill, with whom I played for many, many years. Jerry O'Neill was a phenomenon. He was a wing forward, and he was up there with the best of them, scoring try after try to help Richmond win these 3 in a row. At that time, it was always, as has been alluded to by James, customary to take the winning team down to a hotel. In this case, it was the Mills Hotel, which is now where the Department of Agriculture is, and Miles and Monsell coughed up for the night. And money was no object. Very, very lavish event. A medal was presented to Lyons, the captain of the Richmond team, and that medal is still the Lyons Medal, which is awarded to the best intern in Richmond Hospital originally, and now in Beaumont Hospital every year. Monsell said he had never seen such a team of fine men in his life. The night reminded me of a night when I was president of the Beaumont team, and we won the cup time before last, and we had a lovely dinner over in the Kildare Street University Club. And halfway through, I got a tap on the shoulder from the manager. He said, "Mr. Farrell, I just have to tell you that some of your team have broken into the wine cellar downstairs. I think you better come." So, but the average price of a bottle of wine in the wine cellars are £100. You can imagine how I felt. But anyway, so no harm was done. So moving onwards swiftly, Dennis Kostin played with. Dennis Kostin played with Jamie Kinche and with Eugene Davey, this really handsome-looking man, and with George Stevenson. Stevenson was a medic as well, but he did his medicine over in London. And this, really, the 1920s are all about Jamie Kinche as well. And James tonight told me that they have a book at home with over 900 pages in it, with anecdotes and letters and memorabilia of James Kinche. So I couldn't even begin to scratch the surface of this great man. So suffice it to say that he modelled his playing career on that of C.V. Rook, as Moran had described earlier on. He was a ferocious wing forward. He was not a dirty player, he was a hard player. He toured with the Lions, he came back from the Lions, an even harder player than when he went. It is rumoured, now maybe it's all apocryphal, that he developed his hardness over in CUS on the cement ground where they played tip rugby, with tackling included. A priest over in Father Dunn over in CUS saw him covered in jam at one stage and wiped the jam off his face, ever since he was called Jammy thereafter. His dad, Coo, of course, is buried in Golden Bridge, and it was from Coo that he learnt all about C.V. Rook. And it's wonderful that James is here tonight, and Paul also, all played in the Hospitals Cup, four generations. At that time, there was also Terence Millen. Terence Millen only played once for Ireland, but he was a schoolboy prodigy. In many ways, he was like Larmour is today. He was captain of St Andrews when they won the Schools Cup. He went straight into Trinity, straight onto the first team, was capped for Trinity, and capped many times for Trinity and for Leinster, but also capped for Ireland only once. In fact, I thought he was capped more times for that, but he was a wonderful centre. And of course, afterwards, he became the most outstanding surgeon of his time, and perhaps the only person ever, as far as I know, to be president of the Royal College of Surgeons for 3 consecutive years, almost unheard of. And his name, of course, is linked to the famous Millen meeting that's held in the college every year. A wonderful player. Rugby at this time was dangerous. It really was a dangerous game. I only came across these fatalities as I was leafing through the Irish Times, trying to find out a little bit more about the Hospitals Cup. Here in the space of about 5 years, there were 7 or 8 deaths across Britain and Ireland. Brian Fitzgerald, a young student playing for Lansdowne, whose neck was broken. He was still conscious when he was taken to Baggot Street Hospital. He said the scrum collapsed upon me and then died. Paddy Mullen died over in Galway from a head injury. Finbar Connolly down in the Dolphin Club in Cork. A couple of French players, as you probably might expect. And Maurice Spencer, for whom the Spencer Cup is named after, died of a ruptured spleen out in Suetonians. So it really was a very, very dangerous game at that time. The famous St Vincent's team of 1927-1928, the most outstanding player on this team was an extraordinary man whose son, John, and grandson, Ross, are in the audience tonight. And that, of course, is the famous John Lavin, a Mayo man, true to his core, who had played for Mayo for a number of years before he came up to medicine. He was the man who invented the solo run, where he towed the ball from hand to toe, as he ran at speed towards the opposition. And he decided to use this in the 1921 final against the Dubs. And of course, he scored the winning point, but the referee, never having seen it before, disallowed the point. The game was a draw, and Mayo didn't win then, and I won't go any further because it hasn't happened since. So they didn't win then. But this man was extraordinary. And when he got how do I put it, he got some injuries that prevented him playing as much football and as much rugby as he liked. He turned to athletics. And here he is on the Irish athletic team to Amsterdam in 1928. And who's with them? Theo Phelan, who we saw on the previous Vincent team, over on the right-hand side. Also Dennis Kostin, who lost out, I think, in the semi-finals of the 100 metres. John got as far as the semi-finals of the 400 metres. And Pat O'Callaghan, who won the gold medal, also played Hospitals Rugby, but we haven't been able to find on what team he played. Now, we know that almost certainly he played under an assumed name, because at that time athletics was split as well. So split down the middle, same as the GAA and rugby were. So if anybody has any information about Pat O'Callaghan's Hospitals Rugby playing career, please let us know. I think it's very, very important. The Richmond team continued to dominate, except on this occasion, and you can see the sort of glum faces, and the cup for once is missing. And this was the occasion of the drawn match against Duns. In the drawn match, it was drawn 8-all. Duns missed a conversion, and the conversion went over the bar, but because somebody touched it, it wasn't allowed. Now, that's a rule or a law that I hadn't heard of, but once it was touched on its way over the bar, it was disallowed. And unfortunately for everybody, but especially for Morgan Crowe, he broke his collarbone in that match. And Richmond were really wiped out of it in the second, in the replay by Duns. And that had enormous consequences for Crowe and for the Crowe family for years afterwards, because he had been picked for the Lions. His blazer had been measured. He'd been measured for his blazer. The blazer is still in Dublin in Morgan's house. And together with Paul Murray, they would have gone on the Lions tour, but it didn't happen because of the injury in the Hospitals Cup. So, there are consequences for Hospitals Rugby. For years afterwards, he didn't really speak very much about it. He was a wonderful physician. Here he is at the Biological Society and College of Surgeons in 1948. And here you see Paul Murray at his retirement in the Richmond Hospital. And it was always my task to go to Paul Murray looking for money for jerseys. And every time I looked for money for jerseys for the Hospitals Cup, I got the same story. There was a fella here last year. This fella came last year looking for money. He was a prop, played for St Mary's, became a Fine Gael TD, always got money for jerseys, but never any jerseys appeared. So, it was always difficult to try and come after him to get the money for the jerseys. So there was their life afterwards. Paul Murray was a wonderful man as a student to go. He was an anaesthetist in the Richmond Hospital, wonderful man to go and talk to. Matches against the London teams were a feature of the 1920s and 1930s. Harry Barneville took over as president, and he tried to raise money to get the team to be able to go to London. This is a match against London, and playing for London at the time were G.V. Stevenson, an Irish international, Windsor Lewis, and Guy Morgan, who had been capped for Wales age 19. And of course, the Dublin team really couldn't put up a fight. There were a number of fights over who should be on the team. Trinity had games to play and couldn't allow their players to play for the Dublin Hospitals and so on. The usual trouble with matches. At that time also, the internationals were played up in Belfast. And in 1931, Ireland played Wales up in Belfast. Morgan Crowe was playing for it. Professionalism had come into the game. The Welsh team was, I say, half were policemen and the rest were municipal workers, all making money out of the game. At one stage back then, you could get £400 or £500 to transfer between clubs in Wales. So professionalism was coming in. Somebody had said that the type of man who plays rugby in Wales differs from those who play in other countries, and those inclined to sneer at the Welshmen ought to pay a few visits to Gaelic football or hurling matches and try and get some more well-built men for rugby, the same as the Welshmen were. Suffice it to say that in that match, Morgan Crowe Sr. was tackled by a fellow called Davy, got a concussion, and had to deal with sort of rowdy medical students coming back down to Dublin on the train in preparation while he was preparing for his final medical exams. And there is no truth in the rumour that his final medical exam he was asked all about concussion. Anyway, sorry, he passed with honours. Richmond again won in 1931, beating the Dental Hospital. Frederick Gill took over at a very dangerous time in the competition. There were innumerable fights going on. Whenever a team emerged, such as the Richmond team, there would be objections from other teams about the eligibility of certain players. And a chap called Rowntree turned out for the Richmond, and the Dental objected. Rowntree was kicked out of the competition, but so also was the Richmond Hospital, and they were banned for a year. Somebody wanted them banned for even longer. Paul Murray was down at the Dental Hospital at that stage trying to learn how to do oral anaesthesia, which he subsequently became sort of, as a neurosurgical anaesthetist, it was so important for him in years afterwards. And he was a houseman down there, and the status of houseman was really not determined. He certainly wasn't a dentist, number one. He was a houseman, well qualified, and probably shouldn't have been playing. But anyway, he played. He got kicked out. He got banned from the competition for a couple of years, even though he was a British and Irish Lion. And the Dental Hospital were expelled as well. So this is the sort of thing that used to go on. Now, Frederick Gill was a man who was extraordinarily popular, except with the operating room team. He had a volcanic temper in the operating room. And we're talking sort of instruments flying in all directions. And he'd appear again at the end. But he managed to try and steer the competition through these difficult times. Anyway, it was decided in the end that the dental hospital could play house surgeons provided they held a dental degree and not a medical degree. So Paul Murray never again played for the dental hospital after that. And Harry Mead, as he was called, took over after Gill to try and maintain law and order. It's always been said that rugby can be useful in helping you to advance your medical career. Now, I'm sure there's no truth in that at all. But having said that, R.H. Pratt, you see here on the bottom left-hand side, played for Ireland on about 5 or 6 different occasions. He played for the Adelaide, Trinity, Lansdowne, the RAF, the Combined Services. He was a wonderful fly half, very talented player. But he was also got the house position I think it was in the Adelaide. And he got the house position over a chap called Dennis Burkett. Dennis Burkett probably should have got the Nobel Prize for his work in virology and lymphomas, but he had to take the boat to London because he didn't play rugby, so Pratt got the job ahead of him. So the rugby did help from time to time. Moving on then very swiftly into the sort of 1930s when Jervis Street re-entered the competition. They had a really good team, but they were unfortunate enough to come up against the Mater Hospital, who also had an excellent team at that time. Money was very, very tight. The silver medals that many of you have, there was talk that these medals should not be a silver, that they should be replaced by EPNS. And in fact, if we couldn't afford the medals, we would get ashtrays. And the winning team would get an ashtray. Each player of the winning team would get an ashtray. The Mater came good in 1937, really a fantastic team. Back here is Tommy Heaton, who played for Ireland. The front left-hand corner, Billy O'Dwyer. And I want to draw your attention to a man called Tom Prendeville and another man called Tim Boland. In the centre is F.C. Dwyer, who played for Leinster, played tennis for UCD and for Leinster and indeed for Ireland. Wonderful player. Billy O'Dwyer, of course, was the founder of Nephrology in Ireland. And here you see him commemorating sort of the first dialysis along with Jerry Doyle and Arthur Barry, a gynecologist who played on William Vincent's team at scrum half on a number of occasions. The best Dublin team included both Tom Prendeville. Tom was a very sort of light, small, considerate, gentle man whom I got to know in latter years. County physician down in Clonmel. You would never suspect that he was such a wonderful player. He played for Leinster, played for UCD, Munster, what am I saying? Munster and UCD. And in this famous match against the London Hospitals, he was the only one to take on Babro, the legendary South African. More about him in a second. Tim Boland was an outstanding player. He only weighed 12 stone. He played in the second row. He was captain of UCD. He was captain of the Mater team. He was captain of Leinster. He got a final Irish trial on the possibles, but he just wasn't heavy enough. He became sort of an assistant master in Hollow Street, and later he went to St. Lo along with Owen Gaffney's father, who was here. And here you see Tim giving an anaesthetic to a patient in 1945, immediately after the war. That famous Irish Red Cross expedition that included Sam Beckett and Owen O'Brien's father and so on, from whom this picture is taken. Unfortunately, Tim was to die at a very young age in the early 1950s. A wonderful, wonderful player. The match against the London Hospitals was famous because playing for the London Hospitals and winning the match for them was Louis Babro. Louis Babro had come straight from Eden Park in South Africa, in Auckland, where he had played and scored 2 tries for the Boks against the All Blacks. And they inflicted such a hammering on the All Blacks that back in South Africa they became known as the greatest team ever to leave the shores of New Zealand. They hammered them. Louis Babro was a wonderful player and scored 2 tries, and as I say, only Tom Prendeville was able to hold him. After the war, during the war, he saw service in Dunkirk, and after the war, at the end of the war, he went to El Alamein, where he saw action as well. He returned to South Africa, where he became a really wonderful conscience of South Africa. He was the man who castigated the medics who had approved what had happened to Steve Biko in jail. He tried to get Bram Fisher, the communist, out of jail. He became president of the South African Rugby Football Union, and so on. In every respect, a wonderful player, but really, really a wonderful man as well. As I say, only Tom Prendeville was able to hold him. The war years are difficult, and we don't have very many photographs of the war years. I'm really grateful to Declan Marr for this picture of a UCD team, but it includes many, many people who played in the Hospitals Cup. We had a wonderful morning with Declan, who was here earlier on tonight, listening to stories. And unfortunately, our lawyers are still dealing with the issue of libel and slander in relation to players of that time and Declan's opinion of the players. And it'll all be in the book, though. So buy the book; it'll all be in there. The Matter team was really a wonderful team. Money was raised during the war by these amazing dances. 400 and 500 people in the Gresham Hotel. One was bigger than the other. The pictures in the Irish Times are legendary, like something out of The Great Gatsby. I mean, it's the middle of the emergency. No one knows what they were eating. But everyone was smoking and everyone was having a wonderful time, and the Women's Committee raised the money at the dances, and it kept the rugby going in the 2 hospitals for years and years and years. The dental were cantankerous, and they knew that the Matter was good, they knew that they were good, and they tried a few underhand things to try and have the Matter expelled. And eventually they were called in by the president of the time, told to settle their difference. Both were fined 2 guineas, and that was supposed to be the end of it, except a fellow called Gumbriel, father of Tom, who's now in the Matter, was an illegal player for the Matter, and people were so incensed by what happened that they wanted the Matter banned for 3 years. Now, it didn't happen, but some people feel that it perhaps should have happened. Playing for Vincent at that time was a man called Colin Nolan. He played full-back for UCD and for Vincent. In the sort of match against the Dental, he scored a number of tries. He joined up the Royal Navy Volunteer Reserve, and unfortunately, as soon as the war ended, he was leaving Australia on board a troop carrier that crashed into the Pacific Ocean and died. His father was Professor J.J. Nolan and was the registrar of UCD for many, many years. And then, when I was going through one of the teams, I saw 2 names, 2 Gilvaris. I said, how can there be 2 Gilvaris in the team? Because I knew about one, Tom. But I didn't know that Joe. Joe was a UCD student. He was over in Vincent's. So what was he doing on a winning Richmond team? So, of course, I lifted the phone and asked Joan, who went over very well, could it be true? And, of course, it was true. Tom, who was playing for the Richmond, had asked Joe to come and play. So, now, totally illegal, of course, but they played and they won. And Tom, with a broken ankle, kicked the winning conversion for the Richmond Hospital team. And, of course, the 2 of them were to star in the famous 1951 team after. I am certain that Tom, pictured here, was in the Richmond Hospital and in College of Surgeons at the same time as my father, because they were exactly the same contemporaries. Unfortunately, Tom was killed in a motor vehicle accident in the early 1950s and really left a terrible legacy on the Gilvari family, all of whom are here tonight. But really just a wonderful story. The GA story goes right through the heart of the Hospitals Cup, because you had to get players from somewhere. And here's Donald Keenan, who also played for Vincent's under an assumed name. Many of the players that were really good at GA played under different names, but not the Gilvaris. The 1945 team from the Matter, who you see in the centre, Dr. Moriarty and his son Dennis is here. This man from Kerry was a great stalwart of the Mater Hospital team over many, many years. Also pictured in the team is Brendan Coakley, whose son Dara was to star in the competition years afterwards. He was a tough, hardy individual. And over here is Brian O'Doherty's dad from Wexford. Again, a really good, solid, workmanlike Mater team. But one player in that team that I want to mention specifically was Skinny Dolan. Skinny Dolan was a tough, hard man who played in the front row, but was also capable of scoring large numbers of tries. He became a medical officer of health, worked down in Leitrim, where he was later joined by Kevin Quinn of the famous Quinn family, who had starred for the Richmond Hospital in the 1940s and 50s, capped for Ireland in the late 40s and also in the early 50s. Two wonderful players and two great colleagues as well. I'm almost done. The trips to London were expensive, and they were always worked out on a shoestring, but eventually money was found to get the players over to stay in somewhere nice, such as the Imperial Hotel. 1947 was the year that Jervis Street, captained by Carl Mullen, won the competition for the first time. And to supplement what Morgan said, Carl not just captained Ireland and Jervis Street, he also captained the British and Irish Lions. So nobody has done that in the history of rugby. One of the pubs that they frequented was the Old Cock Tavern in London, and unfortunately the bills for the damage done came into the Dublin Hospitals Committee and had to be paid by the president of the time. There were extraordinary scenes of carnage in that hospital. RCSI had a really good team at the time and were able to take on St. Thomas's by themselves and acquitted themselves very, very well. Later on, the 1954-55 Mater team, you can see here, there are a number of people on it whose sons have also played for the Mater. Rashers Keelan, Billy Ball, and Bill O'Connell over here as well. Three stalwarts of that mid-1950s Mater team whose sons also graced the rugby pitch for the Mater. What about the vets? Every year there was an application from the veterinary hospital to join the Dublin Hospitals Rugby Union. And of course, you couldn't have a veterinary hospital because the constitutional position of a hospital for animals required clarification. So, the problem was that the president at that time was James Marr. And James Marr's brother was T.J. Marr, who was the president of the Irish Farmers. So James Marr, being a democratic individual, decided that he would write individually and canvass the opinions of all of the presidents of the individual teams. And everyone wrote back saying, no, we won't have the veterinary hospital in the competition. But eventually, a number of years, they got into the competition and we're delighted to say that they're still there and they still compete as vigorously as any other team. Alan O'Grady, who was trying to deal with all these fights and rows, wrote in one of the notes, I've enjoyed my time as secretary, but I'm not sorry to cast off a mantle which has at times rested heavily and unshared on my puny shoulders. As I said, money was tight. Maurice O'Connor, who's legendary in Jervis Street, decided that if the Richmond Hospital won, they could pay for their own medals, as far as he was concerned. I'm not suggesting he was getting married to the Reverend Mother here, but so anyway, James Murphy O'Connor was secretary at the time. He stood head and shoulders. He was 6'6", 6'7", the tallest man to play for Ireland in many, many years. And he was secretary of the Dublin Hospitals. He'd already won a hospital's medal in London with St. Mary's Hospital in 1943. He then joined the Navy, and after the Navy came to Dublin to finish off his medicine in the College of Surgeons. He was a terrific player. He played for Ireland on several occasions. His brother was a Cardinal Murphy O'Connor. His dad and his uncle had both captained Munster, and of course were deeply upset when he togged out for Leinster and for Bective. But what could he do? He also took part in the famous match against the London Hospitals, and in the centre starring for the London Hospitals was Lewis Cannell. Lewis Cannell played for England 18 times in the centre at that time with Jeff Rutherford. And it was widely expected that Rutherford and Cannell would be the Lions pair for the tour to South Africa. What did Cannell do? He was studying to be a radiologist. He decided he wouldn't go because he wanted to study. Imagine anything like it. So that was the end. that was the end of Cannell's time as a Lion. But of course, on that team also was the great legendary Bill Mulcahy. Bill Mulcahy was the star for Vincent on so many occasions. Unfortunately, he was to break his leg in a famous match against the Denton Hospital, I think, which was to cost him a place on an Irish team later on in the course of his career. But he was the man that I first started hearing about. When my own father started talking to me about rugby, it was all about Mulcahy. Everything that he did was so wonderful on the pitch. An amazing man. And I think he's here tonight. At least I hope he is. And then finally, the famous Duns team, 1957 and 58, already mentioned by James, but what I didn't mention was that this team was presided over, the president was Seymour Heatley. Now, Seymour Heatley was a small, somewhat inoffensive surgeon in Patrick Duns, who was delighted to be president of the Duns team at the time and president of the Dublin Hospitals Rugby. He had been given a torrid time throughout his life in Paddy Duns by Frederick Gill. Gill never spoke to him. In 30 or 40 years working together, they never, ever spoke. The two teams would walk on the corner, eyes right or eyes left, and there was no conversing. And for Heatley to be president of the team that won the Hospitals Cup on 2 occasions, he more or less gave it to Gill after that. So, I will stop here now because this is the emergence then of the famous dental hospital team that will win 3 in a row, and Morgan or Con's going to take over at this stage. So I'll stop there. So thank you very much.